prime those plasma coils, and reload those quake shells. Today, we go over how to bring your God Engine's weapons to bear in the combat phase of Adeptus Titanicus. The combat phase is broken down into 6 steps, and these 6 steps will apply to every weapon on whatever Titan you've activated. As per usual in Titanicus, this is an activation game, and the player that activates first will be the one determined to have the initiative based on the roll-off in the strategy phase that we already covered. When it's your turn to act in the combat phase, the first thing you do is select which one of your Titans you want to activate. In this case, I'll select a Warlord Titan and then move on to the steps per weapon. So, starting off with select target. Now, this can be really tricky because in Titanicus, there's actually no pre-measuring. So you're going to have to become pretty good at guessing where your targets will sit within your arcs and even weapon range, because it's possible you selected a target within arc, but it's out of range of your weapon, meaning you'll waste that shot. If you choose a target that isn't within any of your arcs, regardless of range, you'll actually end up wasting your whole activation and it'll go to your opponent. So it becomes really important you get good at kind of visualizing what your Titan and guns are capable of. In the case of our Warlord here, it's actually got its choice of 3 targets, and the best way to visualize this is try and picture whatever class of Titan you're using's measure gauge or arc template and how that would fold out on the table. Looking at this game board, it's a safe bet that the Warhound to the left of the Warlord is out of everything. The Warhound at the top of the screen is probably within its arcs, and that Reaver could be kind of dicey. Once I throw an overlay on this screen though, you can see that I could actually put all of my guns on that one Warhound if I had line of sight, and I could only get my arm weapons on the Reaver. If I had selected that Warhound on the left, then I would have totally wasted this activation. So choosing your targets wisely really will matter, and you're just going to have to get good at visualizing what you can touch and what you can hit it with. After you've selected your target, the next thing you're going to want to do is declare which one of your weapon systems you want to attack with. This is different from every Titan class. Like a Warhound will technically have 3 weapon systems, a Warlord will technically have 5, and so on. This will include things like their smash attacks or Ardax defense arrays. In the case of our Warlord Titan here, it's got its paired laser blasters, volcano cannon, and Ariok power claw. Obviously, the power claw's close range. It's not going to do anything for targets in the distance. And how you select your weapon is going to be pretty situational. You're really going to need to think about the status of your target and what you want to get done that round. For instance, if I was shooting at a shielded target and I thought both my weapon systems were in range, I wouldn't want to open up with the volcano cannon because it's only one shot. The best I could do with a direct hit is cause my opponent to lose 2 layers of shields. So what I'd want to do is open up with the laser blasters, 1 because they can be shield banged and make my opponent's shield saves worse. 2, they've actually got more shots, so I have much better odds of dropping my opponent's shields and then following up with that volcano cannon so it can do what it's designed to do, really hurt armor with that high strength. It actually gets completely opposite if I'm shooting at an unshielded target. I would want to open up with the volcano cannon, put some heavy hits somewhere on the target, maybe causing some critical damage or some modifiers to its structure track. And then I would want to follow up with the laser blasters because they can do called shots or targeted hits, and any damage I might have done to that structure track would actually make the laser blaster's lower strength more effective. So it becomes a bit of a game of figuring out smooth orders of operations for your weapon firing. There's a lot of different guns in this game, and I'll actually be releasing a separate video on specific weapons and their traits. But just familiarize yourself with your weapon traits and definitions, because a lot of them have unique ways of being used. The next thing we have to do is check the firing solution for our chosen weapon that we're attacking with. To do this, starting out, first thing you want to do is you want to actually measure the range from your Titan to its target, and then refer to the Titan's weapon card for that specific gun, in this case the volcano cannon, and you're going to look under ranges and see where that measured range applies to in its short or long range, and this will actually give you some potentially modifying numbers right under where it says ACC. They're usually a plus or negative. Some Titans or weapons are worse when they're shooting at range, and some of them actually get better. You're also going to want to take a look at where it says arc, because that will tell you whether it's firing in your front corridor or your front arc, as well as the weapon traits. In this case, for the volcano cannon, we don't have any range modifiers to worry about, so we can move on. After we've figured out if the gun is in range or not, if it wasn't in range, then the shot would have been wasted, and we would just move on with the list. But in this case, it is in range, so the next thing we're going to do is throw down our arc template for the Warlord to just make sure that our target is within arc of the firing weapon. So you can see the Reaver is out of my front corridor, so I wouldn't have been able to attack it with my carapace weapons, but it is in my front arc, so that volcano cannon does have arc, and I can continue to attack with it. Once we know we have arc, we're going to have to check the line of sight. When I'm checking line of sight for carapace weapons, what I typically like to do is kind of get down to Titan level and look directly through the spacing of the void shield relays and the paired weapons themselves, just to make sure I do have an unobstructed line of sight. When it comes to arm-mounted weapons, sometimes people will model their weapons in a kind of janky way, like they'll have a gun pointed up in the air or a gun pointed down to the ground like it's shooting a tank. To get around that, I typically find the best way of checking line of sight for your arms is to actually look from the elbow joint of the gun, regardless of whatever pose your model's in. That elbow joint or pivot point should stay about the same, and it's a pretty good reference point. Once you're looking down, in the case of the volcano cannon, down that elbow joint directly at our opponent, we're going to have to see if our opponent's going to get any obscured or cover modifiers to our hit rolls. In this case, our target, the Reaver, is about 25% obscured. So depending on how obscured it is, we'll apply different bonuses. If your target is 25 to 50%, or 25 to 49% technically, obscured, then you would apply a -1 to your hit rolls, and if the target is 50% or higher obscured, you're actually going to get hit with a -2 to your hit rolls. All the information we find out in this step actually gets applied to the next step, where we start rolling some dice. Okay, let's see how well these Moderati can hit. To start things off for your hit rolls, you're going to want to look at your Titan's command terminal at its characteristics, in particular its weapon skill and ballistic skill. Your ballistic skill's used for targets over 2 inches away, and your weapon skill's used for targets within 2 inches. You'll notice your weapon skill's a lot harder to hit with than your ballistic skill, and that's, I would imagine, because it's harder for your Titan to bring its weapons on the mark the closer in they are, and we're talking about Titans here, not Gundams. These things are pretty sluggish and not exactly optimized for close combat, but they can hit like a brick train. After you've determined which one of those two characteristics you're using to start your calculations with, you're going to want to look at your Titan's weapon card for the gun you're firing. And pay particular attention to the dice value. This is essentially your shots. So the volcano cannon has a dice value of 1, meaning I'll get to roll 1 die and it has 1 shot. And it comes with the draining trait, and it's shooting a 5-inch blast template. This will be important for how the shots actually play out. So for the draining trait, I'm going to have to roll a reactor die. In this case, I got 2 reactors, so I'll advance my Warlord's reactor track by 2 spots towards the red. And because this is a blast weapon, I have to overlay that central hole outlined in green on any point overlapping my target's base, so it can't be placed in the middle of nowhere to try and score 1 hit on multiple targets. It has to be overlaid somewhere on that Reaver's base, and we'll see what happens from there. If you remember, for our firing solutions, this is where we're actually going to apply a few of those modifiers. To start things off, the Warlord has a ballistic skill of 3+. There were no range modifiers for the volcano cannon, so we don't need to worry about that. The Reaver was 20% covered, so I'm going to suffer a -1. Because this is a template weapon, I can't actually do called shots for this gun, so that won't apply, it's not applicable. And we'll calculate our roll required, which ends up being a 4+. So on a 4+, on a d6 die, the Warlord will land a direct hit wherever I had that template. And because it's a blast weapon and that central hole on a hit will end up on the Reaver's base, that's actually going to count as a double hit, and I'll get 2 hits out of that. I'll show you how that plays out here though. So we needed a 4+ to hit. I got a 5, which means that template lands on that Reaver's base exactly where I wanted it to. Due to the blast rule, I'm actually going to get 2 hits on the Reaver. Now, on this roll of a 2, I actually miss. So because this is a template weapon, I'm going to have to do something called scattering. And I'll use a scatter die and a d10 and apply those results. In this case, I rolled a veer off to the right, and that's at a distance of 3. So I'll measure that center hole of the template, and I'll slide it off 3 inches and reapply the blast marker. In this case, the central hole of the template is off of the Reaver's base, but the radius around that template is still overlapping the model's base. So I'm actually still going to land 1 hit here, and that's due to the blast rules for that weapon type. Now that we have our hit pool, we're actually going to have to resolve those hits. For this section, I'm going to go under the pretense that we got 2 hits on our target, just because it'll let me show a little more off of what's involved here. The first scenario we'll look at is if our target had active void shields. In this case, our opponent or target has its void shields in the 3+ level, so they'll be taking those 2 hits on a 3+. In this case, they rolled a 2 and a 5, so they've passed one and failed the other. This means they'll reduce their void shield track by 1 position, and we'll move on to the steps with another weapon if we had more weapons to go on to. Before moving on, I should probably mention something called void shield blowouts. So, say your opponent doesn't have enough void shields left to save the shots that you've scored. Well, for that weapon that you're firing with, those shots won't overspill into your opponent's armor. It's actually assumed those shots are lost in the void shields overloading. So you wouldn't factor the collapsed void shields until the next weapon you go through the combat phase with. So just keep in mind there's no overspilling. Once that weapon drops the shields, then you're going to have to move on to your next gun to actually damage armor. The other scenario that could happen at the resolve hits step for the combat phase is if your opponent or target had collapsed void shields. So they won't be making any void shield saves here. You're actually going to be doing something called armor rolls. And again, we'll assume that we got 2 hits for this example. The first thing you're going to want to do is look at the attacking weapon's weapon card, in particular at its strength value. For our volcano cannon, it has a strength of 12, and we'll be using that for our armor rolls. When it comes to armor rolls, there's actually a few things that could modify this roll and actually make your weapon more effective. If you're attacking a target within its side arc, you'll get a +1 to your armor roll. If you're attacking within your target's rear arc, you get a +2. And if your target is hit in a specific location that's already damaged, then you'll actually get a bonus to your armor roll depending on how damaged that location is. Again, this shows off how facing is just so critical to Titanicus and positioning, because it impacts your shooting and how much damage you receive. So to do an armor roll, first thing you're going to do is roll a location die, and this will apply to untargeted shots or non-called shots. Because this is a blast weapon, I can't do called shots. And I've rolled a special on the location die. For all the Titans in the game right now, a special is actually allocated to a Titan's body, but I do know the War Master has special locations, so we'll start seeing that come into play in different ways. The big thing to note is, if you roll a special result, look at your Titan's command terminal, and that will tell you where to apply a special to. So we've rolled a special going to that Reaver Titan's body, a 1 and a 4 for our armor rolls, and our target, the Reaver Titan's body, is completely untouched and undamaged. The rulebook states, regardless of the weapon's strength, a armor roll of 1 is always superficial, meaning it won't do any damage, regardless of the weapon's strength. And we will be looking at how that 4 plays out. So to start this off, you take your weapon strength, that strength 12, and we're going to add that d6 value of 4 to it. This will give us a total of strength 16 to the Reaver's body. We'll then go to the Reaver's command terminal and look under its body structure track to see what this hit actually does. A 16 is actually greater than the 15 plus required for a critical hit on the Reaver's body. So in this case, our target, the Reaver, will suffer 1 point of critical damage on the critical track, and it'll lose 2 points of structure on its structure track. For the last example of this step, we're going to go as complicated as I think we need to go. In this case, again, our target's void shields are collapsed. We've got our 2 hits. We're shooting again with the strength 12 volcano cannon. This time, we're going to be attacking from within the Reaver's side arc, giving us a +1 bonus. And our Reaver's body is actually already damaged, giving us a +1 to that armor roll. I'd start off again with the location die. We've rolled a special, so this is going to that Reaver's damaged body. This time we've rolled a 2 and a 3, so no superficial hits here, everything's going to go through. And I might have forgot to mention it in the last example, but you start by allocating your armor rolls from lowest to highest. So we'll start with that 2. We factor in the weapon's strength 12, we'll add the +2 for the die roll of 2, we get a +1 for the arc modifier, and because our opponent's damaged, its structure track for its body is giving us a +1. That's going to bring our strength 12 weapon up to a total of strength 16. We know from the previous hit that all we needed for a crit was 15 or higher, so the Reaver will suffer a critical hit to its body. In this case, it gets 1 point of critical damage on the critical track, and it loses 2 points of structure track on its body. We'll now move on to that result of a 3. So we'll add the 12 for the weapon strength, a 3 for the die roll on a d6, plus 1 for the arc modifier, and we're actually going to reuse that plus 1 for its structure track rather than the plus 2 it currently sits in. That would be because the weapon's hitting both of those shots at the same time. So that plus 2 on the structure track wouldn't be used until you move on to your next weapon. Although, again, we're going to do another critical hit onto this Reaver's body. So you'll start by moving the critical track up 1 position, and then it would do 2 points of structural damage to the structure track. Because the Reavers run out of structure points, that's actually going to result in an additional critical hit. So this Reaver's body ends up being 1 hit away from being totally destroyed. And I think that kind of shows off as complicated as your average armor roll is going to get. The last step of the combat phase is actually repeating steps 2 through 6 for all of our remaining weapons. We already ran through the examples with our volcano cannon on this warlord, so the volcano cannon has now gone through steps 1 through 6. We'd then move on to another weapon system. In this case, I'll go to the laser blasters, but I'll only be doing steps 2 through 6. I'm going to ignore select target because unless this Titan was under a split fire order, it can't choose another target for each of its weapons. Once the paired laser blasters move through steps 2 through 5, and we're done using it, we'll repeat step 6 on the power claw if we can use it. This time though, we'll only be doing steps 2 through 5 because I can't select a different target, and I have no other weapons to repeat these steps on. Once we're done with the power claw, and it could have been anything, it could have been another volcano cannon, but once we've gone through the steps of all of our available weapons, then this Titan's activation in the combat phase is completed. At this point, you would move on to your opponent, and your opponent would activate one of their Titans in the exact same way, and you would just keep alternating back and forth until you guys have gone through all of your activations. Holy information overload! That was a lot of moving parts and things to look at. If you've made it this far, congratulations. You're probably experiencing either the caffeine shakes or staring at an empty bottle of booze. Either case, I commend you, because this is probably the most intense phase of the game. I'm sure I missed something in there. Hilariously enough, thinking about it, I already know I missed talking about the one thing I should have remembered, how to use voids to full. But I guess look that one up. If I missed something else, feel free to fire it in the comments below. I wouldn't be the slightest bit surprised to find out I got something wrong in there as well, so just let everybody know in the comments and we'll all learn together. If you were having a hard time keeping up with the command terminal and weapon card stuff, being a newer player, then I'd say check out the channel's command terminal video for Titans in the basics playlist. That might help clear things up for you, hopefully. We're almost done the Reactors Hot playlist. We just have the next video, the end phase, to go over, and I will catch everyone for that. Take it easy, and see you soon. That's everything for today's topic. If you enjoyed the video, hit the like button, or if you're interested in more Titanicus content and how to play, subscribe to the channel. Thanks for stopping by, and I'll catch you on the next one.